Needs no introduction, but it's always a pleasure to remind people that he has been an Aspen Educational Fellow in his time, and Crown Fellow. Was just here meeting with his Crown class, and a real driver in education reform in America, both in Chicago and now as Secretary of Education. To his right is Jim Shelton, who's been a close friend and is now in the Education Department, had been at the Gates Foundation, Jim Shelton. And I'm going to actually start by turning it over to Wendy Hawkins, who, Wendy is, let me grab it real quick, exactly, Intel Teach was the name of it, which you founded, but obviously with the Intel Corporation. But she's the executive director now of the Intel Foundation, but more than that, has had a passion for creating great teachers for your whole life. So thank you for being a co-host with us.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you and welcome to all of you who are here. We're delighted to be able to host this event. Intel is deeply committed to education, and that is represented in crass material terms by an investment of $100 million a year in our education programs, and we work with teachers around the world through the Intel Teach program. 7 million teachers around the world have received professional development in effective use of technology and STEM education and 21st century skills as a result of that work. And we're very proud sponsors of the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair and Science Talent Search. So we try to put our money where our mouth is, and today we're delighted to get to put our ears there too and hear from all of you who have deep expertise in the field to look at ideas for how we all might work together more collaboratively in the future to address some of the issues that Secretary Duncan has so ably laid out before the nation. I'd like to take this moment to introduce my colleague and friend, Carlos Contreras, who is the U.S. Director of Education for Intel and works here in Washington, D.C., leading our programs for the U.S., and I encourage you all to take the opportunity to meet him. He's a great guy and very talented, so we're very proud to have him here. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And real quickly, some of the things we're doing at the Aspen Institute, we do have a Young Leaders in Education program modeled after the Crown program that Arne was a part of. That's now in its third or fourth year, right, of producing young fellows in education. We are going to, we hope, work with the New Schools Venture Fund to create their summit annually in Washington of people who are involved in innovation and education. Gary Huggins of the Aspen Institute helped do that. Most of you know Ross Wiener right there, who's helped put this together and many other things. And Nancy Peltz-Padgett also runs an education program for us in New York, out of New York. But everything from urban school superintendents to chief academic officers and various groups that have been put together. So I think we're kind of, if there's any one thing we do at the Institute now, it's pushing the notion of K through 12 education in America and what can be done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary. The theme of the lunch is not just Jim's field, which is innovation and education, but the importance of education for America's innovation and to keep it competitive in the 21st century. See you. Thanks.
I'll be very, very brief, and this is obviously an extraordinary group of people in this room. Appreciate you taking the time, and I actually want to do it to use the time to pose some questions to get your help and feedback. I think this is a pretty impressive brain trust here and a couple issues that we're struggling with to get your thoughts. First, the Walter and Aspen team. I just obviously a huge fan of what you guys do, and I'll say that the two most important sort of professional development opportunities I've had have both come out of Aspen. So I owe so much of what I've learned to you guys. You mentioned the urban superintendents that Nancy's helped lead, and that was just absolutely invaluable when I was starting in Chicago, didn't have a clue what I was doing, and it gave me having a chance to talk to people who were a lot smarter than me and pick their brain and learn some things. We met twice a year, and it was just absolutely invaluable. And then being a part of the Henry Crown Fellowship Program, just a remarkable group of people, all the meetings, and had a chance last week to be here, sort of alumni group, and those are friends for life that I would never have met without this program. So I just appreciate your leadership so much, and what you're doing. We're obviously at this extraordinary moment of opportunity in this country, which all of you guys know, and many of you have helped, frankly, shape. And we have a chance to break through I think we have a chance to get exponentially better. You guys know as well as I do how far we have to go in the sense of urgency that I think we all share. The two challenges that we're struggling with, and again, I'd love to sort of pose some questions and get your thoughts and feedback. We're trying to become the department that leads innovation. We're trying to stop being a compliance-driven bureaucracy. We're trying to change the business we're in. So repeatedly, as hard as we're pushing other folks to change and move, be they states or boards or parents or students themselves, we're trying to move further and faster ourselves. We've been a part of the problem. So we're trying to unleash creativity, innovation in ways that hasn't happened before. Three quick examples. The race at the top, we're going to have a huge number of states come in. We'll be able to fund a limited number of those. Jim's fund, the Invest in Innovation Fund, extraordinary proposals. We're going to have probably 1,900 applicants. If we're lucky, we'll fund 100. They'll probably be closer to 70, quite frankly, of those 1,900. Promise Neighborhoods, trying to replicate Jeff Canada's work. We have a maximum 20 slots. We have 941 applicants there. So the question for us to think about is, with limited resources, I think we've unleashed some sense of innovation, some sense of possibility. We want to take to scale what works. What we don't want to do is make a tiny percent of folks happy and have a lot of other folks walk away discouraged or unsupported or feel their work isn't valued. And so the question is, how do we collectively, not just the small percent that we fund, but the vast majority of great ideas who unfortunately we simply can't fund, how do we keep the momentum going with them? How do we continue to support them? How do we keep that critical work moving in the right direction? So this could be a real catalytic force to get better as a country, or this could be a real sort of depressive downer. And we want to avoid that at all costs. And at every level, state, district, community, we're playing at all three. And there's this outpouring of passion, outpouring of people want to change, they want to get better, they want to move, but we don't physically have the dollars to help them all. So how do we think about building capacity and keeping folks moving? The second question, and then I'll open it up, that is we try and drive innovation, try and get better. As all of you know, unfortunately, we're working at a time of declining revenue. And so we're working very, very hard now with Senator Harkin and Congressman Obey and Congressman Miller to pass emergency legislation to save hundreds of thousands of jobs and sort of avoid an education catastrophe. I was with the NEA and the AFT this morning and a couple of the congressmen, and we're desperately asking Congress to do the right thing and step up, and we hope they will. This is far from a done deal. But even if they do that, the fact is we're at a time of declining revenue. We're at a very, very tough time economically, as all of you guys know, as a country. And as we go forward, I'm not wildly optimistic that next year or the year after will be much better than it is today. So the question is, in a time of declining resources, how do we continue to push for transformational change? How do we continue to push for reform? How do we continue to innovate and don't sort of retrench or take a step back? So to me, we're at this amazing time of opportunity, but also a time of extraordinary risk on both those fronts, whether innovation stops due to folks feeling we're not paying enough attention to them and feeling unsupported, whether due to lack of funding we don't find more creative, more cost-efficient, more effective ways to educate with scarce resources. And so those are the two of, I think, the huge challenges that we're trying to figure out how to address those as we move forward. And I would love to have a conversation on either of those or anything else you have to bring up. But those, I think, are the greatest risks that we face that would prevent us from getting the kind of breakthrough that we need to do collectively.
Let me just ask people to introduce themselves or say who they are before they give comments, because everybody in this room seems to be a leader in the field of education reform. Wendy, do you want to start?
We've got such a brain trust
right.
around the table, I'd rather hear from you than hear my own voice.
God, yeah. Hey.
I'll start. John Katzman from Tudor Hiring. Just to your first question, I'm sure you've already thought about this, but just to throw it out, National Merit Winners and that whole program, probably 99% of the money comes from someone other than the College Board. If you declared winners in the innovation or in Race to the Top, but unfunded winners, so they're somewhere between finalist and winner. It gives people a badge to raise money. We had a great idea. We were a X.
Get a better
think
name
there's
than
a lot of-
runner-up.
That's
Gold medalist or something.
I think people like Intel would come in right behind you or Gates to fund the people who you gave that blessing to.
I have. I'm Brent Kerwin, Chancellor of the University of Maryland system, and sort of along those lines, I wonder if at some point there couldn't be some grants for states who didn't win an RT, the Race to the Top, but who could take some of the good ideas that have worked with the initial grants, sort of some way of funding efforts at a more modest level, perhaps, but to take the good ideas that have been generated and move them into other states. There's one other sort of related to your second question, but a great, probably not surprising since I come from higher education, a great concern of mine is that not enough attention on innovation has been paid to higher education. Let's take a look at this. University of Washington has lost one-third of its general fund over the last 3 years. California is a basket case. California is turning away hundreds of thousands of students at the community college level. It is very unlikely states are going to be able to build back those budgets. We can't move forward to meet the president's goal of leading the world in college completion if we don't find some different models for delivering higher education at our best institutions. They just can't afford. So is there some opportunity, and I know money's tight, but to have some sort of programs that will catalyze the kind of reform on education delivery we must have in our country if we're going to have any chance of meeting the president's goal?
Well, on the higher ed side, as you know, we pushed hard and it did not happen to get this access to completion
Right.
fund, which would have been basically a race to the top on the higher ed side. That didn't happen. We need to find another way to come back at it, but we see a huge need there. You're exactly right. For us to meet that goal, we have to do a much better job, not just on the access, but on the attainment piece, and that's very uneven, frankly.
Right.
And I desperately worry where you got, lots and lots of young people trying to get a higher education who are getting turned down today. Like,
Exactly.
what opportunities do they have? So I don't have an easy answer on it, but it's something that we have to find a way to address and be part of the solution.
Mayor Schmoke, or
Yeah.
Dean Schmoke, I
Great,
guess I should
great.
call you.
Mr. Secretary, I'm Kurt Schmoke. I used to be a mayor up the road.
And now a dean right
Gavin
close
Dean at
by.
Howard Law School, but 12 years as mayor of Baltimore and dealt with the unions. I had an AFT affiliate there. And just 2 points that I hope may be of help. One, I think it's important for you to continue to try to get the media to stop demonizing unions. Unions, the teachers' unions can be helpful and partner with you and be creative if they don't feel completely put upon and that the worst of them get magnified as being the example of the whole. And I know you've done a great deal of that, but to the extent that you can be a leader and trying to get folks to not just completely demonizing, it'll help. The other thing, but more important to the point that you made earlier about resources, I found after dealing with public education, I didn't need more money. What I needed was fewer regulations. I needed our education pie. The budget was divided 3 ways: local resources, state, and federal. The state had regulations, and I'll take, for example, on disability education. State had regulations, the feds had regulations. By the time I finished in office, 35% of the education budget was going to 17% of the children, solely to comply with regulation. And all I'm simply suggesting is that since you're under budget constraints, if you think about goals but block grant, in some ways it's like what the Clinton administration did on housing. They gave us the same amount of money, but they did it in block grants that said be creative. So instead of just feeding old public housing, we were able to tear down and remake and rethink an approach. Same dollars, absolutely same dollars, but a different approach. So anything that you could do to get the state and the federal regulations to be in sync, and in some way reduce it, but set goals that the local education jurisdictions have to meet, I think that would help you along the way.
A couple thoughts. First of all, I'm just a huge fan of yours and followed you very, very closely in Baltimore. And I think folks in the room may have some idea, but probably don't know the entire context. But the recent teachers' contract here in Washington, I think, is a fundamental breakthrough. And I can tell you quite honestly, that would never have happened without this man's involvement. And I want you to know how much I appreciate what you did there. That was tenuous at best, and your leadership and your thoughtfulness and your ability to be a great moderator and mediator was huge. And that contract and that breakthrough, I think, has national implications.
Hope it gets passed.
Let's hope we get past. All right,
Intel will fund any gap you have.
I don't speak too soon, but your leadership was huge there, and I want you to know how much I appreciate what you did there. So two things. Your first point is a big one, and I actually want to challenge this room a little bit. That this room is a combination of lots of different folks, but it has, not surprisingly, reform tilt or reform bent. And I think, as much as I love the reform community, I think the reform community has been part of the problem a little bit on that first point of really demonizing the unions. And the media loves controversy. The media loves to play where things aren't working. And do unions have to change? Absolutely. And my good friend John Wilson is here, and every day we're pushing, NEA and AFT as they're pushing us that we all have to change. But are there extraordinary innovation and courage being shown by unions at the local and national level? Absolutely. And you guys know the media loves to play controversy. The media doesn't love to play where people are actually just working hard and getting stuff done. It's not sexy. It doesn't play. And I think we have to tell those stories. And there are hundreds of them. It's not like one or two. There are hundreds of great examples going on. Are there enough? No. We have to keep working. But there are people showing extraordinary leadership. And when you look at those first race to the top winners, unions are doing things that would have been unimaginable, and somehow that story's been lost a little bit. At the local level, there's remarkable work happening, and we have to find ways to celebrate that, and also continue to challenge where things aren't moving. And let me be really clear: for us to get dramatically better, it's not just unions that have to change. You can make a pretty compelling case that school boards have been a huge part of the problem. When I joined Nancy's group of urban superintendents, I was, by definition, the youngest one. And this was the 12, 13, 14 biggest districts in the country, largely. And in about my fourth year, I think I was the senior member outside of one with Beverly Hall. The average lifetime of a superintendent in an urban area is 2.6 years. That's not because of the union. That's lack of board leadership. And challenging superintendents to have courage and to make tough calls and do things. So unions are a piece of the equation, but by no means the equation. We need to celebrate successes, and we need to challenge school boards, and we need to challenge superintendents to have courage. I think I'm a little biased, one of the best superintendents in the country here, Jerry Wiest. He's had a good run. He's done great work. But how many years have you been there?
11.
11. You have like him and Bev Hall in Atlanta, who's done about 10 or 11. And everybody else, it's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. That's my only regret with taking this job was I was bound and determined I wanted to do at least 10 years in Chicago. I didn't have that chance. Obviously, this was a unique opportunity. But that's the absolute exception. And where you have folks of his talent and Bev's and others, you got to give them time to work. And that just doesn't happen. And that's not anything to do with the union. So we need to reward success. We need to challenge, intransience, but we need to challenge everybody to move. And that's a huge point. On the flexibilities, we can sort of get into it. That's a big piece of what we want to do with ESA reauthorization, is frankly provide a heck of a lot more flexibility. Not micromanage 95,000 schools. We want to be much more tough-minded at the bottom where things aren't working and really challenge people to do things fundamentally different. And that's hard and controversial, and not everybody agrees with that. But what we want to do is hold people accountable for results, challenge them where it's not working, but get out of their way. And I think we have, again, been part of the problem, whether it's special ed regulations, whether it's other regulations. I want to hold school boards, hold superintendents accountable for results, but give them room to move. and particularly high performers get totally out of their way and target our efforts and be very, very focused where we need to challenge the status quo and let folks move who are doing good work.
John Wilson, Executive Director of the National Education Association. I'm always happy when someone else talks that way, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we should never underestimate that sometimes union bashing translates into teacher bashing. And teachers feel it's very hard to divide teachers from their unions. And so, and when people are going through tough economic times, that it makes it even worse. And so I would just kind of raise that consciousness there around that. But I actually wanted to ask, you talked about that the federal government is very compliance driven. And that translates at the local level to so much bureaucracy and the inability to take good programs and good resources and make them work for good education for our students. And I think that you know, some of the great examples that I've seen, I was actually talking here about, particularly for math and science. When math and science combines with career and technology and the Perkins money, you should see what happens at a school level. Most schools would say, oh, well, we can't do that. You know, so sometimes they don't think they have permission to do that. The law may allow it, but they don't have permission to do that. And also, when we talk to our math and science teachers and we ask them, what will keep you in the classroom? You know, what will keep you in schools? They say, we need help on labs. And I've often wondered why we didn't take AmeriCorps and some of the programs like that and put a focus on providing the assistance, particularly to do more labs, to do more engagement, which is so important in science and, quite frankly, math also. So it just seems to me like we have to build this integration, whether it's Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Commerce. There are always these little pieces of education that affect that. And the last thing I'll say is the school improvement grant money is a blessing to schools and just as large as Race to the Top. And I do worry that if we don't embrace those bottom 5% schools as individuals and as organizations, that we won't see the return that we really need to see out of that kind of investment in our most challenging schools. So I just ask you to comment on some of those.
Let's take your last point, that it's interesting again that you hit the nail on the head. We did Race to the Top, which is $4 billion for the whole country, and that's gotten all the press. School improvement grants was $4 billion for 5% of the schools. It's a massive, massive disproportionate investment, and nobody sort of picked up on that yet. And that to me is perhaps the more interesting story long term, that those schools where it's simply not working for children, and by definition not working for the adults there either, if we can transform that bottom piece of our portfolio, eliminate those dropout factories, we change opportunity structures forever for those children in those neighborhoods. So this is a huge investment. It's a risky one. Lots of folks think you can't do it, or these places can't change, or that poverty's destiny, and I just absolutely reject that. But if we can move as a country and every year start to get better turning around the nation's chronically underperforming schools, we will change opportunity structures, particularly for Black and Hispanic children, in ways that I think we've been absolutely negligent for decades in this country. And so it is a massive opportunity, no guarantee for success, but we have to break through. And for all the challenges we faced, the reason I'm so hopeful is we've never had more high poverty, high performing schools. And Katie, in your work's been so helpful pointing out that this is possible. And it's frankly, it's not just possible, it's happening all over the country, urban, rural, suburban. And so the question I think for all of us is, why do we tolerate failure when we know success is not some theory or some hope in the future, hope in the unseen, but it's happening every day. And we have a chance to break through, and we need to do it together. And if we do it systemically the next 3, 4, 5 years, the back end of this country looks very, very different than it does today.
David?
I'm Dave Coleman. I work on the Common Core standards, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. It would seem if you are in a situation where resources are declining, but you at the same time want to achieve a breakthrough in performance, that you must somehow radically improve the efficiency of the resources we do put into this field. And so just a hypothesis is that there would be two essential parts to that, neither of which are popular, so these do not represent anything having to do with Common Core standards, so I don't mean to in any way make those less popular by anything I offer here as a suggestion. One is, the first is probably popular. One is, I think we really need in this country a lightweight research infrastructure that allows us to determine what works and what does not. It is remarkable, with all the years of NCLB testing, we still have a what works clearinghouse database that's barely populated with things that are demonstrated to work, and that's despite having common tests across states. So we can't assume, just because there's a common assessment and because there's common standards, that there's the lightweight research infrastructure that would clearly give Jim, in his next iteration, much more reliable and comparable data in a lightweight way, because what young companies can't afford, and I ran one of them, is you can't afford to really prove your results. You can't build you can't sponsor the research studies. So that's one of the reasons there's only an oligopoly left in education, because how can you say, we'll focus on product, we'll achieve a breakthrough for kids, that will then be visible to the world, and then it could be taken up. So how do we design a lightweight infrastructure on the heels of common standards and assessment that really could show us what works and what's most efficient, meaning it works and it's inexpensive? It could measure two things. The second would be for the federal government or groups here to take a much stronger voice to claiming what does not work. There are cases where the evidence is fairly overwhelming, but we are unwilling to admit that, for example, I think the evidence is clear, forgive me, that thus far a master's degree in education is proven not to distinguish your performance in the classroom. Overwhelming number of studies have shown that fact again and again and again. But we invest billions of dollars today in the earning of those degrees. There are several cases like this. We invest an enormous amount of money reducing class size in later grades when there is no clear evidence that that has an effect on student performance. If we're not willing to as courageously say what is not proven or even what is disproven, I think we can't shift resources efficiently, and I think that needs to be a part of our work.
Two great points. Jim, do you want to speak to the evidence base and the data and how we're trying to think about that with I3 and others?
Yeah, I mean, David hits a critical point, which is working with John Easton, who runs our IES, we were trying to really rethink what does the R&D infrastructure look like in this next iteration. We have a unique opportunity in that the SAA is coming up for reauthorization, but also ESRA, which actually is where a lot of this work is decided. The question of how you build out that infrastructure, what it looks like, and how the data systems that our other programs are encouraging can support it is the big question. But it's no doubt that we, if we make that decision, are well poised to be able to create that kind of infrastructure. The question then is, will we use the evidence base and framework that we put forward consistently, and then also follow through on it when it says we did the evaluation and in fact it showed it didn't work.
Wait, Jim, could you tell me what type of database and evidence you think we should have eventually in this country? I mean, should we?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that the fundamentals of it have been laid out over and over again about being able to track longitudinally in ways that protect the privacy of students so that you can distinguish program effects and teacher effects. So that means you need to be able to track each student, how they're progressing over time, and you need to be able to connect them to their teachers. And in some instances, it's not clear that you want to be able to have to be able to do this everywhere, but you want to be able to track it down to the program and class and schedule level so that you can have a very clear indication of, in this kind of environment, with these kind of students and this kind of a teacher, this program worked or didn't work. Mm-hmm. That probably means you need a two-layered system, one which is very broad, that has very deep has good capability on the highest level stuff I talked about connectivity, and then some much more detailed instrumentation in some places, be they districts and or schools, where you really can start to distinguish between teacher effects versus program effects.
And do you think we're going to get there soon?
I think that we can get there on the thin layer first. I think that getting to the deep instrumentation is something that we have to make the decision to do and invest in.
We're actually funding a lot of state longitudinal data systems and put out a lot of money last week, and you have a number of states that are really sort of getting to the point where this will be the norm.
Yeah, Gary?
Just a quick follow-up on Jim's point. The Ed Sciences Reform Act being up for reauthorization, and of course the SEA we're all hoping for run the Commission on No Child Left Behind at Aspen. it seems like we're having sort of an upfront, out there conversation about No Child Left Behind, what your priorities are there with your blueprint and the rest, but the Ezra conversation happens in the background. And one of the things that we've sort of focused on in the commission is that these things are really tightly tied together. And if we're going to have success on the back end of NCLB, ESEA, like we haven't had the first time around, the transparency works, we need to tie those two together and get better at that back end level as well. So I'm curious if you guys do plan similar priorities on that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. It's one we got to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, John and John, in that order, I guess.
On the declining resources,
Why don't you introduce yourself?
John
too,
Bailey
so-
with Ducko Worldwide. On the declining resources question on how to fund, the next runner-ups on I3 and school turnaround, there's a really successful program at Treasury called the New Markets Tax Credit, which was formed in the Clinton administration to help attract private sector dollars in low-income communities. It's been widely hailed as a success. I think for every dollar foregone federal revenue, it's attracted $8 of private sector support. But it's become a vehicle to help attract private sector investment for scaling charter schools. JP Morgan Chase just worked with Jim on a big rollout of $200 million using this financing facility to help scale and replicate high-performing charters in New York City. But there might be a way with ESEA reauthorization of changing some of the definitions and replicating that program so you're not attracting dollars to just low-income communities, but maybe to those 5,000 low-performing schools or to low-income communities as a way of making these areas that have traditionally not been attractive for private sector investment much more attractive.
That's really helpful. Roberto sitting next to you is my partner in crime in this stuff. He's taking notes, but no, that's helpful. Thanks.
It strikes me that the toughest thing is to stop thinking about kind of large-scale change and to start thinking about how do we create a system that innovates itself, that itself evolves. When we talk about things in aggregate, a lot of times we miss the picture. Right now, charter schools in aggregate aren't getting incredible performance, but it'd be a big mistake to turn off the charter schools. It would make more sense to kind of look at which ones are working and which ones aren't, and what do we do about it? And to the degree that we can target ESEA money, not at the state and not even at the district, but give it directly to the schools and start thinking about how do we create like a series of initiatives that schools can innovate and be rewarded for success rather than try to impose innovation on them. I'd love to hear how you're thinking about that.
So we are trying to get resources as much as we can to the ground, to the local level. What we're trying to figure out how to do, which I think NCLB frankly didn't do, is find ways to reward success. And that is at the individual teacher level. So teacher incentive fund we put out last week, almost $500 million, staggering amount of money. Teacher level, principal, school level, district, and state. And I think there's take 10% of anything, 10% of states, 10% of districts, 10% of schools. The top 10% anywhere is probably doing a pretty extraordinary job. And how do we shine a spotlight? How do we give them more resources? We normally reward failure in education, not success. How do we partner them with struggling places? But how do we learn? That's the other big thing we haven't sort of talked about is knowledge transfer. How do we figure out what's working in those schools, districts, and states and take that to scale? So that to me is one of the biggest shifts that we want to make in reauthorization is find ways to put a spotlight on excellence, learn from it, and reward it.
Just to build on that point, Bob Hughes from New Visions for Public Schools in New York, and we've done a lot of school shutdown and recreation. One of the things we were very interested in is can schools opt out of districts? So we did an intensive amount of study on charter conversion as a possibility. There's three big challenges to that work. One is just an uninsurable workers' comp risk and the interplay between contracts and individual school needs. The second is pension, a tough issue to deal with, but right now, if you look at two similarly situated schools of 440, a charter school has about $2.2 million more in discretionary dollars than a public school. So reallocating and rethinking how we're using those dollars tied to kind of restructuring pay and compensation for teachers, I think is really critical. But ultimately, I think it would be interesting for the feds to fund some sort of initiative where schools can opt out of their district structure
and actually start to form virtual associations or districts of schools. Right now in New York State, we have 776 districts. Trying to reform each one of those districts and deal with that bureaucracy will be almost impossible. So creating opportunities for schools where it's appropriate to opt out of the existing governance structure it may ultimately lead to kind of the transformation we're thinking about.
That's a fascinating one. And when I ran at public schools, we actually tried to facilitate a set of schools sort of opting out of our traditional structure and giving them autonomy. And we did one place we didn't think about how we connect those to other schools like that around the country. So that's good food for thought. Thank you.
Yeah, Marguerite and David, yeah.
Thank you. Marguerite Kondracki, America's Promise Alliance, and I want to go back to the chronic underperforming schools. And you know, I think schools were not designed to handle so many kids with so many problems and so many challenges, and so the schools can't go it alone. So I'm thinking that we might borrow a page from the Obama campaign, that you've got a growing army of supporters, and how do we mobilize the parents even as well as the community to be engaged and really focus on transforming these underperforming schools in those neighborhoods, and then bring in the community supports that the kids need to be able to learn once they get into the classroom. There's going to be a challenge and an opportunity this fall with this Waiting for Superman coming out, and I think that is going to be controversial, but it is certainly going to prompt a great deal of conversation. And I feel like many of us would like to be supportive of channeling that conversation in a productive fashion. Every child deserves a great education. How can we mobilize and how can we serve you to help mobilize parents and communities to be supportive of the hard turnaround work and the student supports that are needed for these chronically underperforming schools?
Yeah, these are all great questions, and obviously your guys' leadership on challenging these dropout factories and putting the conversation on the table nationally has been extraordinarily helpful. So, a couple thoughts. The challenge, well, do these schools need more supports? Absolutely, and I'm actually pretty hopeful that we can engage community. We need to do that. We need to be thoughtful. Promise Neighborhoods is a piece of that, but you need the nonprofits, you need the social service agencies, and that takes some work. I'm actually pretty sure we can do that. The parent piece is, to me, the much more complex one. And let me give you my thinking and what the challenge is. And this is just a personal experience, closing a fair number of chronically underperforming schools, is that it's hard for parents to want what they don't know and what they've never had and that they've never seen. So the huge paradox in America is that every parent thinks their school's okay and they think the rest of the schools aren't okay. It's this total disconnect between sort of perception and reality, and that's poor parents, middle-class parents, wealthy parents. Everyone gives their own schools a B+, A-, and gives the country a C or C-. So the math doesn't add up, but that's the reality. And when I closed, absolutely inner city tough schools in Chicago, those were schools often the parents went to themselves, so there was a tie. That was all they knew. They had never seen quality education and didn't know what they're missing. And so I think the most important thing we can do is we need to start physically taking parents to visit high-performing, inner city schools. And again, we have more of those around the country now than ever before. But parents have to see, and then they want that for their child. But you can't want what you don't know. You have to give a reason to hope and then a reason to change. And I think we've done a very, very poor job of empowering parents by giving them a vision of what's possible. These families are poor, we know, because the parents didn't get a good education. They've never seen this. And so I think that's the biggest thing we can do, is to empower parents by giving them a physical tour, a virtual tour, meeting with parents. It's not going to be superintendents, not going to be boards, it's going to be parents talking to parents. What we ended up doing is every year after we started closing schools, there's always World War III, there's always a huge amount of drama, is we'd take those parents who are most upset to go visit schools we closed the year before. And after a while, after a couple of years, that had an unbelievable impact. And the parents who are the most angry become your biggest supporters because they actually care the most and they're the most engaged. It's the parents you never hear from are the ones you worry most about. But you have to give parents a vision and a taste and a sense of what's possible. And that's what I think we haven't begun to do enough of in this country.
Can I follow up on that, which is, what is your thought philosophically on the role parental choice and school choice can play in either spurring that, or that's not part of the solution? And leave aside all the vouchers and the political parts of it.
I always just think that what's worked for wealthy folks in this country usually work for poor folks. And wealthy folks in this country have had lots of good education options for a couple centuries. Right. And so I absolutely think in an ideal world, every parent would have 3, 4, 5 great options to choose from.
So how do we get there?
How do you do that? You have to create more great schools in underserved communities and create a set of choices, a set of options, traditional schools, non-traditional, charter, magnet, gifted, IB, different math and science, fine arts, vocational, lots of different, sort of a portfolio, a menu of options, and let parents figure out the best learning environment for their children.
Sorry, David, I didn't mean to get in front of you.
David Leonhardt with the New York Times. You mentioned the demise of the Access and Completion Fund, and it's obviously easier politically to get places to change if you have new money coming in, as with Race to the Top.
Yeah.
But given that that doesn't seem to be one of the options right now, I'd be interested in hearing you talk about whether you could imagine reorienting some higher education money, both from the institution level money and the student level money, so that institutions are rewarded for actually graduating kids, and unfortunately what obviously has to go with that is punished for not graduating them. And the same to some extent with students. My favorite example is West Virginia, where their version of the Hope Lottery Scholarship, kids can get it only if they were made on track to graduate in 4 years. And that's by no means the only idea, but can you imagine taking money away from places that aren't getting kids on the track to graduation and moving more toward places that are?
Yes. Stay tuned.
Can you announce it today?
No.
Okay.
But you're exactly. You gotta reward success, and you gotta put some. Pell Grants being the obvious one. Everybody gets a Pell Grant. Doesn't matter whether you make it 3 months or 4 years. And so, how do you reward folks that are not just getting students in the front end, but graduating them at the back? So there's lots of room for us to be much more creative. We're working on it.
Yeah. Amanda Ripley. Yeah.
Amanda Ripley from Time Magazine and others. First, I just want to make a very quick point about parents and choice. I mean, I think, just again, just speaking personally, it is almost impossible to sort out which schools are performing better than others given the demographics of the students that those schools have. And that to me is the question, and you should be able to plug in a school and find that out just like that, because DCPS has that data. I don't know why. I mean, as a parent, it is impossible to figure that out without doing a lot of math that may or may not be right. So I think, school choice is great, but if people can't figure out how their schools and teachers are performing relative to the socioeconomic situation of those kids, it's just you're groping around in the dark. But that's my little...
Well, wait, why don't we let Jim or somebody comment on that if that's going to be part of your data-driven models?
Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right, and that's one of the things that actually ought to be really transparent in the new model. One of the big emphasis that Arne has put on the reauthorization of the ESEA is also on growth. So you're not just looking at absolute performance, but you're looking at, are you actually moving students along? And that's one of the ways you'll be able to pierce through the information that you're looking at today.
Which works really well in the classroom, right? Like some of the most effective public school teachers I know are looking at diagnostics all the time to see, well, how's this student doing compared to other students in the classroom, compared to other students in DC, compared to nationally. And it's really cool, and it's very dynamic, and there's no reason that shouldn't be more public, or in my opinion. But the question I want to ask, though, is many people made the point that this challenge is a lot like healthcare reform, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of money going in for very little sort of outcomes-based evidence as to what works. And but the conversation seems to sort of end there with education. I mean, we all sort of assume that you can't really compare our kids to, kids in Finland or Singapore. I wonder what you think about that. Have you found international comparisons that you think are extremely instructive on some piece of this puzzle, because we know that the investment per pupil is lower and more effective, and we know that there's huge changes, right? Like Finland wasn't always that effective, and that's changed over time. So it's not like this sort of static equation.
So I think, TIMS, PISA, all that stuff, we pay a huge amount of attention to it. And that's part of our sort of call for change is how much, how far behind our 15-year-olds on, math or science, or pick an indicator when you're looking internationally. So I think those are valid, reliable. I mean, it's at the aggregate, obviously, there's huge variation in any country, but I mean, I think that's part of the competitive disadvantage that we're at right now. That's the gap we're trying to close. I mean, it's not just an achievement gap in the country. I'm worried about the gap with other, for our students internationally. That's the battle. That's the economy we're in. So that stuff is an absolute driver of what we're doing, and. So are there lessons we can learn? Is there one country we want to be like? No. Are there lessons we can learn from a bunch of places that are doing some interesting things and getting better results with often less dollars? Yes, there are. There are very significant lessons we can learn from.
Anything specific, any specific country, any specific policy that you think that you're looking at as a model?
I mean, there's a lot of them, so I don't want to just pull one out. Obviously, India and China students are going to school between 30 and 45 days more a year than we are. So that's use of time with students. Other countries, Finland being one of them, is doing interesting things around teacher time. It's not just student time; it's teacher time and time to collaborate. England, we're talking about community supports. England is working to have every high school be a community center, all open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So there's a litany of places. Again, I don't think there's one place that's got it figured out. In terms of curriculum assessments, there are many countries that are light years ahead of where we are, frankly, and that's why this work that David and Mike and others are doing, it's, I think, absolute game changers. So unfortunately, there are lots of places we can look to that I think are being, at this point, more creative, more innovative than we are. It also gives us a chance to leapfrog and get better faster.
But to pick two of those, would you think our school system in an ideal time should have schools that go 11 months a year and that are open till 7 p.m.?
Actually, 13 months a year. Right? To me, we're crazy on this. I mean, and again, it's tough financially, so I don't want to, But we don't need.
We're at the Aspen Institute. We don't have to do budgets.
Yeah, this is one where we don't need more research and study on summer reading loss. We know that particularly disadvaged kids get to a certain point in June and they come back in September further behind when they left.
But wait, why do we then permit this in this country?
I can't answer that question. Lack of resources, lack of investment, lack of imagination. I mean, I don't have a good answer for that. But I think schools, to answer your question, schools should be open 12 months a year, 6, 7 days a week, 11, 12 months a year, 11, 12 hours a day, all kinds of different things going on for children and for their parents and for their families.
Sorry, yeah.
Goldie Blumenstick with the Chronicle of Higher Education. If the federal government was to reallocate some resources, I'd be actually interested where that would be coming from, but also what are the kinds of things that you would want to reward under such a reallocation in higher ed?
Attainment.
Graduation rates, meaning?
Yes, attainment. Not just admissions, attainment. And cost containment would be the other one that would be interesting. Colleges is quick. Colleges are very much like high schools. It's pretty interesting when you look at the data. Some do a phenomenal job of building college completion cultures and helping first-generation, low-income and minority students graduate, and some do a horrendous job. And we actually started to track this in Chicago, and we frankly started to steer students away from certain colleges and towards others because students with identical backgrounds were getting wildly different outcomes. So it's not too dissimilar to the high school challenges we face at all, frankly.
Michael.
Thank you. Mike Cohn from Achieve. I want to try to connect two strands of the conversation that's been going on. One is the fact that there are plenty of things that we know work from either national or international evidence, while at the same time we continue to spend money on things that we know don't work. So it seems like there's a match to be made here. And the federal government, I think, can play a role if you can figure out a way to provide some incentives, mainly which would provide cover for states or districts to make the difficult choices to stop doing things that don't pay off and reallocate that money to things that do pay off. And a little bit of money and a lot of attention from the federal government can create an environment in which those kinds of changes
transition fund.
It's transition funding. It is. I mean, imagine if the discussion around a smaller amount of money was not a race to the top, but not probably a good choice of words, a race to the bottom line, right? We're in a tougher economic environment. The budgets are not going to get bigger every year, right? These declines are serious, are going to be around for a while. How do we fundamentally change the way we do business to be both more productive and more efficient? And if you started rewarding places and leaders that were willing to step up and take on those kinds of challenges, I think you would set an example for they would set an example for the country, and the discussion would be, why aren't we doing that? Why are we still paying professional development money for people to get masters when we could spend the money for lengthening the school year over the summer, for example? You could see those trade-offs being made, and really structure ways in which they can be addressed.
That's a fascinating idea. Just so if they reallocate $1, we would give them a dime or a quarter or a nickel, whatever it might be. Is that the basic thought?
Yeah, yeah, and you probably have to give them the dime up front. Right, so there's
do I get a refund if it doesn't work?
It's less money than you're giving them up front now.
Yeah, no, I know it's a fascinating idea, and Jim's pushing me real hard on this one. So, yeah.
Especially since if you have the data of what, it ties into having the better data systems, I think, are the key to all of this.
I guess, we should absolutely think about it. So my question, maybe it's the political cover, my question is, given how horrendous budgets are today, how come that doesn't happen naturally? So when Jack's job is on the line, the state superintendent's job is on the line, the board is there, and every year you're faced with horrendous budget cuts. If we, why don't those tough things happen? Is it political? Is it like what prevents that from any CEO, any manager from allocating resources towards what works and away from what doesn't?
I think we would agree with Michael. Jack Dale, Fairfax County. I think the issue is a little bit of money can go a long way to change policy, local policy. I think that's Michael's point. So you match it on, dime to $1 or whatever. You can have some incentives locally to pick up an extra few bucks. It's not going to be forever. It's going to be over a 2-3 year period of time because you need time to institute the change. But it's a seed money to get the change started.
Joanne?
It's a fascinating idea.
Joanne Armeo with the Washington Post editorial board. On the question of the longer school year, this is more of a question. How much of it is money and how much of it is attitudes of middle class and other parents? I'm curious, Dr. Wiest and Mr. Dale, if you had the money and you proposed lengthening the school year, what do you think your middle class parents would say to that?
And let me just say before they do that, not every parent needs this. So again, this should be a targeted intervention. We can't afford it. So if middle class families are going to, going to Aspen or going to the museum or wherever,
leave our kids behind.
Tell you right. So again, this is to me, it's a targeted intervention. So it's not the whole country. The whole country doesn't need this, but a lot of our kids do. But let them answer.
The answer is yes, they will. If it's targeted for means. We do it right now. We have our extensive ESO sale program in the summer where we make it like a camp, raffle bicycles and things like that, and kids come. You've got to have a congruent after-school program. You've got to have a congruent between the school year program. And if you do that and you put it in the right places and make it engaging enough where people really want to come, they come. And they come, and it really makes a difference because they get a preview. Our kindergartners are in kindergarten in our neighborhoods that are highly impacted before school starts. They have a whole year within those first 3 grades. I wanted to ask a question if I could. This is a really smart bunch. And I would like to see you have a longer time frame. And the way it works in our political system, unfortunately, is the election starts sooner rather than later. And I think we're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to answer the question, are we better off now than we were? And I think we need to figure out amongst us, what are we going to call success in the next 18 months? Because you got a lot of initiatives, and you're trying to change a culture where half of the employees walk out in 5 years, and a third of the kids only graduate prepared, and a third don't graduate, and a third are graduating unprepared. That's huge. So I think we need to shrink that change and focus in, what are we going to call some success? And I would appreciate anybody's answer to that, because if we don't do that, we will follow along the many reforms that we've all been through that never worked. And that's one of the issues I see superintendents don't do when they go to their job. They promise everything right in on the horse and can't get it changed quick enough because they can't execute at a scalable level because they don't have the capacity. If they did, they would have done it. And I think if we do this right, we can start staging in the expectations of America. And I think we start with the race to the top. I think we do some other kinds of things, but we start defining what the success is.
You know, let me add, I think it starts with doing it at a very high level.
Absolutely.
Which is, we're entering a new century in which innovation and knowledge-based economy is going to rule. We dominated the 20th century with the best K through 12 education system that graduated, I think, #1, you know, more graduates than any other country. Now we're about, I don't know, somewhere 18th to 20th if, in terms of everything. So we're not putting out people who are career ready for the 21st century or college ready for the 21st century. And I would mention David and others who have done the national, the common standards. State-run common standards, where we're finally trying to define what do you need to know to be innovative and imaginative in a 21st century economy. And
what are you going to settle for, Walter, though, when Arne's team comes up for re-election? Is it moving from 18th to 17th? Is it, you know, what are you going to settle for to say we're on the right road? That's what I'm trying to get across. If we don't do that, it will be defined for us.
That's a great question. So I don't, you know, it's something we all have to think about, obviously. So two-part answer. One is, you know, the ultimate goal, the President's drawing a line in the sand, it's this leading the world in college graduation rates.
Exactly.
So we need to every year hold ourselves accountable for moving that needle. And if 3 years from now we haven't done it, then shame on us. That's a piece of it. The other piece, that's a little bit more tangible. The harder piece is obviously we're trying to change structures that will remain for the next 4 decades. And we need to be able to articulate whether it's higher standards, whether it's better assessments, whether it's getting rid of laws that block innovation, whether it's finding ways to reward excellence. We're trying to, you know, we're trying to change this game in a number of ways that the dividends are going to, you know, far outlast our time here. And being able to articulate how we're putting in place the structures that will lead to the long-term success. That's a little bit more academic, a little bit more intellectual, but we have to be able to make that case because that's where we're betting the house on that.
can you actually give us what those, like if you had 3 or 4 structures you could renovate by the end of, 8 years?
More than 3 or 4, so,
Yeah.
but I mean, early childhood, it's greater access and much higher quality. So again, that's even if you're looking at 3rd grade test scores, that's a 5-year trajectory before you see anything. So that's a piece of it. I mean, I think the K to 12, where we're trying to play, which is higher standards, better assessments, much better data transparency, rewarding talent, great talent, and challenging the status quo at the bottom of performing schools. And then in the higher ed side, it'd be around not just access, but around completion. So those are the benchmarks.
But you said, it'd be great to have schools that stayed open 12 months a year, I'll put it.
Yeah.
Great that had schools that were open till 7 p.m. and were community centers. It'd be great for every parent to have a choice of 3 or 4 great schools. How do you change structures in this society so we get from here to there in the next 5, 10 years?
Well, those are strategies to an end. Those aren't ends in those are strategies to get to better outcomes. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put money behind places that are good and good outcomes. And those are pieces of the equation. So we'll try and support those places doing that. Obviously, if it's a horrendous school, keeping that school open 12 hours a day isn't going to help. You need to have a good school open 12 hours a day. So there's no magic bullets, but where we can put lots of discretionary resources behind places that are getting better results for students through a variety of strategies, those being a couple, that's our play.
One of the other things that Arne and the team through SEA has done is reposition by these resources that are already there, like 21st century community learning centers and things like that, around this model of how you actually increase the amount of time, increase the linkages to community supports, and think about after school and summer, so that it's built into the most important piece of legislation, the SEA, which will continue then to structure well beyond where we are today.
Brett? Yes. I hate to, Mr. Secretary, be repetitive, but I have to come back to a point. The ultimate goal is to be number one in college completion. And we're doing lots of things at the K through 12 sector to do that. Now, if we're going to meet this goal, we have to increase the percentage of 25 to 35-year-olds with a college degree by 2020 by 50%. And meanwhile, the states are investing less and less in higher education. Capacity is actually shrinking. So maybe we're on the track to fix the K through 12 problem, but where are these kids going to go? Who's worrying about the capacity to handle these kids when they come through our K through 12? So that's what worries me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So one thing we're doing is to hit that president's goal, we're actually laying out what each state has to contribute to get to that higher bar. And there's some variation state by state, but there's actually the average per state to hit that goal is they have to increase those graduates by about 4.2% a year. And so what we're going to do is we're going to sit this summer with Joe Manchin, who's the incoming head of the National Governors Association, and walk through with him and every governor what their state needs to do to contribute to this. And it's not just going to be at the state level, that's going to be for every institution of higher education within the state. We actually want to map this all the way down to what every high school has to contribute. You can think about this going all the way down to early childhood. So I absolutely hear you, and I hear the concern about the lack of capacity and the lack of investment. But we're going to challenge states on a state-by-state basis to see who's going to do what to help us increase those numbers. And
It's
see
very badly needed. I'm glad to hear you say that.
Wendy?
I wanted to just pursue a little bit the question of charter schools and their role in bringing about the kind of innovation and change in education, and in particular, the notion of how do we bring into a systemic impact those changes that are being demonstrated through those charter schools. If we're giving them that freedom and we're investing those dollars, how do we then transition that into the public schools? That doesn't seem to be happening.
It's a great question. I've said that the best charter schools in the country are doing a phenomenal job of changing children's lives, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And they've been game changers. Someone said earlier, charters nationally haven't really broken through. And I've challenged the charter school community to be much tougher on the bad performers. And when Dave talks about stop doing some things that aren't working, we got some charter schools that need to close. And we need to be much more honest and open about that. But the high performers, are there huge lessons? Of course. So what do we need to do? We need to give them the space to replicate and to spread their mat. What's different today from 10 years ago is you have folks at scale nationally. So it's not, again, one miracle charismatic principle, but it's a discipline that Kip and others have developed that is producing results all over the country. We need to give them the chance to continue to replicate and remove those barriers from them. We need to work with both the innovative charter school community and with superintendents. I think there's a lot of distrust, and get both to open up and share. There are places where charters can learn from traditional school districts, and that both sides. And I think that those conversations don't happen enough. What's interesting to me is just sort of the frame of this is that so much of this is, I think we're fighting the wrong battles. And I think whether it's districts and charters or unions or charters or whatever, charters are always going to be a piece of the solution. They're never going to be the solution. I think in this country we have one common enemy, and that's academic failure. That's the only enemy we have. And we need to unite to fight and eliminate that enemy as rapidly as we can. And any other fight, I think, absolutely misses the point of sort of why we all come to this work and why we do that. And if we can try and build a culture where folks get much more focused on the bigger picture and not on these tiny skirmishes that are huge distractions, a huge waste of time and energy, and don't help students learn, I think that would be a major breakthrough.
Walter? Yeah, and then make this the last, and I'll have one last question to wrap it up, but so quickly, Blair.
Blair Levin, I'm with the Aspen Institute. I just finished up helping write the National Broadband Plan, and want to thank Jim in particular for tremendous help in helping us lay out some things. Speaking of wrong fights, a lot of controversy. Saw you on television the other day talking about Texas and the whole curriculum and textbook thing. My question, clearly coming out of the broadband thing, why are we talking about textbooks? Why are we talking about a medium that made sense in 1920, a medium that cannot be assessed, cannot give us data, is not robust, cannot be upgraded every day? Why are we moving much more aggressively to using transmitting educational content in ways that every day we learn, and then this follows up on things Dave was saying, other people were saying, learn what students are doing well. A teacher can come in and see which math problem all the kids got wrong last night, that kind of thing. Why aren't we moving that way?
Amen. And I couldn't agree more. And again, this is where this sector can be helpful. Jim, maybe you can sort of talk a little bit about open source and other things we're trying to do, but I think education in this country could look very, very different 5 years from now than it does today. And it's because we're using technology. A School of One in New York and some other things that are just fascinating. But we are with an outdated, antiquated model that doesn't make sense. There's actually pretty significant breakthrough in pockets, but again, it's pockets, so I could share some of that with you. But to take it to scale is sort of the challenge. And I think, again, if we do this, and part of this, these funds are to try and make some bets there and blow some things up. And I think education could look dramatically different in a couple years than it does today. Dramatically different. Do you want to add anything?
No, one, I just want to repeat the thanks to you for the leadership you and the team provided there. I mean, the broadband plan has always had, is a huge, and if we actually get the kind of ubiquity with the connection to schools that it proposes, it'll be a game changer. Additionally, we've put out a National Education Technology Plan that lays out this basic vision, and to Arne's credit, he pushed in the SEA, if you pay attention, for whether it's through the Race to the Top assessment competition, move towards technology-based solutions, or embedded in the blueprint, very much an emphasis that we're not talking about the traditional resources. We are trying to open up the space for states and districts to adopt technology-based solutions. But ultimately, it comes down to state and local decision-making and what kind of choices they make, and can they free up the funding to be able to flow into these new areas. And then the last piece is, can we get the supply side to meet them?
Let me end by, if I may, making a little comment about New Orleans that I've noticed, and leave that as a way for you to cast forward to the future in the post Race to the Top era, post I3 era, which is in New Orleans nowadays we have quite a bit of choice, and we don't make any distinction. I mean, I can hardly tell what's a charter school, what's a Recovery School District school, what's a state-run school, what's the Orleans Parish School Board school. And I was in Gentilly High School, and at the end still couldn't figure out last week exactly. I mean, I knew who ran it, but so we don't make all these false distinctions. But the one thing that seems to be a strong driver, and you endorsed it earlier at lunch, is parents have choice amongst all the schools. They do. And so there are charts that tell you, as Amanda said, exactly what the graduation rates, what the math scores are, but everything else, and those charts are published in the Times-Picayune and New Orleans Magazine. They're almost Zagat's guides. Competing companies try to tell you how to rate a school. And I notice each year, especially when the New Orleans Magazine guide comes out, how things change, because they show the chart. And how late is the school open? About half of them had till 5 or 6 p.m. about 4 years ago. Every single one of them is now open to 6 p.m. Are they community centers? Yes. Lengthening the school year is because the parents were choosing the ones in which those schools stayed open till 6, because frankly, there ain't no reason to dump a kid out in the streets of New Orleans at 3 in the afternoon. So when parents had the choice, and it meant even the Recovery School District schools, the Orleans Parish schools, as well as the charter schools, all were pushing that back till it's now 7 p.m. Even school uniforms, now almost every one of them has it, because people chose the schools that had uniforms. I say this as a way to let you end up by saying, by answering, in a year or two, you're going to be past the Race to the Top arrow in your quiver that you've been using and the I3 arrow, and you're going to have to look for ways to sustain the momentum that created. What are the great drivers that will sustain momentum when you no longer have these great arrows that you're now using so well in your quiver?
So, a couple answers. One is obviously, frankly, the easy part is giving out the money. The harder part is working with the states to build the capacity to deliver. And so we need to reorientate our department from a grant-making one to building capacity at the state and district level and supporting the exchange of ideas across both winners and losers. So I think that's a huge, move into implementation. So can we help folks implement well? And as you well know, there's varying degrees of capacity at the state and district level. That's no surprise. So we got to be in that business. We got to be sharing, and we got to be helping, again, winners and non-winners share those best practices. I would also argue, and this is something I worry a lot about, I think we need to race to the top 3 and 4 and 5. And we need I3, 2, and 3, and 4. And again, I think of Jim, 900 applicants, and he's going to fund 70. We need to come back next year and fund another 70. Come back the next year and fund another 70. Race to the top. If we fund whatever it is, 8, 10, 12, the second go around, we need to come back next year and fund 8, 10, 12. And we need to be in the business of doing this as a country year after year after year. This is not one bite at the apple. And folks want to move, they want to get better. The challenge is politically, this is a hard one to do. And frankly, I need this community's, I told the 850 people who don't win I3 can't all yell about a Russian judge. They need to help us. They need to help us figure out how we get the next set of I3 and create the demand, create the demand for that. And so this has to be. We as a Department of Education, we as administration, need to be in the business of driving innovation reform on an ongoing basis. And we desperately want that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right.